Royal Standley of Oregon Pacific Financial Advisors, offering securities through United Planners Financial Services member FINRA SIPC, guides clients with empathy in discovering and reaching their financial goals, and creates financial plans for clients so they can live their life by design. In these episodes, he relates his financial insights and discusses timely topics. Royal strives for excellence and has a passion for sharing his knowledge and supporting his community. Now, on to the show.
Hey, Royal. How you been?
I'm good. How are you doing, Eric?
I'm fantastic. I'm so excited to get into today's podcast, but you are in a highly regulated industry.
Yes, I am.
And because of that, sometimes we have a disclosure that needs to be read. So let's do it.
All right. Here's the disclosure for today. Discussions in this show are for educational purposes only. Information presented should not be considered specific investment advice or a recommendation to take any particular course of action. Always consult with a financial professional regarding your personal situation before making any financial decisions. The views and opinions expressed are based on current economic and market conditions and are subject to change. All investing involves risk, including the potential for loss of principal. Securities offered through United Planners Financial Services, member FINRA, SIPC. Advisory service offered through Oregon Pacific Financial Advisors, Inc. Oregon Pacific Financial Advisors and United Planners are independent companies, and neither Oregon Pacific Financial Advisors nor United Planners offers tax or legal advice.
Okay, now that we've taken our medicine, can we get on with the show?
Let's go.
Welcome to the Life by Design podcast with Royal Standley. Royal, good day. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Bill. I'm excited to have you here today. So, as listeners know, this is your new voice here joining the podcast.
I was going to say, I'm clearly not Eric to all the people who've been listening for many years to you, but it's great to be here with you.
And you know, we're excited to have you join the team here, and really looking forward to today because I just wanted to take today and learn, more about you. Eric, shared your resume with me, and we got a chance to chat a little bit before this, but I thought it'd just be fun to get on the microphone and just talk about some of your history, your perspectives, and where you're coming from.
All right, okay, I'm fair game. Let's do it.
Excellent. So Bill, you have a pretty extensive resume of working in various parts of the media. How do you describe your career?
I describe my career as an unexpected blessing because I look at my career and I looking back on it, I'm kind of stunned. I don't know how a guy who came from the meager beginnings that I came from ended up having what by any measure was a very successful career, and a career doing something I have really, really just enjoyed for every minute of it. And I've been very fortunate. I've worked with some really good people. I've, as you know, from looking at my resume, have been privileged to earn a couple of prestigious awards. I won a George Foster Peabody for work that I did in production. And I've also was a 3-time Emmy nominee and won an Emmy as a reporter in front of the camera. So it's been a fun and interesting career, Roy.
Well, I'm looking forward to diving in a little bit here. Tell us a little bit about how you grew up and how you started to break into, it sounds like the arts and media.
Well, it's interesting, and on my, as I tell people all the time, let's start with where I grew up. I was born in the South and grew up in the South, and was raised primarily in Texas. When I was in high school, I got into radio because I needed to pick up some part-time work, and a friend of mine worked at the radio station. So I tell people all the time, my career actually in media began in high school in radio. And it's interesting that I've come back around to audio here at this part of my career. It gives it a nice, certain sort of beautiful symmetry that I really like. I worked in radio, had a great time. I worked in FM radio, which it was the early days, Royal, when like anything went. I mean, you could talk for 3 hours. You could play a song that went on for 45 minutes. Nobody complained. Nobody cared. And it was fun, but I used to do rock music like Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night. So I was the nighttime guy. The radio station went off the air at 2 a.m, and we would come back on at 6 a.m. So Saturday night, I would wrap up my rock show. I would go home. I would turn around and I would come back in to the radio station on Sunday mornings and go from rock to gospel music. Had a guy from McKinney, Texas, who would come in with a big stack of albums, and I was his engineer, as it were. And he would come in, and for 2 hours we did nothing but country gospel music. And it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot because he was a terrific gentleman. He was so great. And my worst nightmare was one Sunday he came in and he goes, Bill, I was listening to your show last night. And I'm thinking, oh, Lord, it's a little different than what we do on Sunday mornings. And I was like, it sure is. I hope you didn't mind. He goes, no, that's fine. I really enjoy spending time with you. And we went on and did the show. Interestingly, Royal, I do volunteer work at a nonprofit local FM radio station about 5 miles from my house. And I'm in conversations with them talking about cemetery and cyclical things about doing a 1-hour gospel radio for them. So
very
nice. Goes to McKinney lives on, as it were.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. So raised in Texas.
Yes.
My father grew up in Texas. What part of Texas?
Northeast part of the state, Richardson, Texas, and then just about 60 miles north in a little town called Sherman, Texas, which at the time when we moved there was about 10,000 people. When I left to go to college at Baylor University, it was about 25,000 people, courtesy the Texas Instrument plant that had been built in Sherman. So that's where my dad worked. And so, yeah.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. And so you went to school at Baylor.
Then
after Baylor, how did you start kind of stumbling into journalism? Was that a focus in school?
No. What's interesting, what has been always interesting to me all of my life are stories. I like stories. And so while I was at Baylor, I actually majored in theater. And when I left Baylor, I went into regional theater work. And ended up in San Francisco, and in the mid to late 70s was active in the theater scene in San Francisco. I got restless, and I'd moved down to LA briefly, did a show with a couple of friends of mine, moved up to Washington State, and I was staying with a friend of mine. And I got there, and we went out, we had something to eat, we came back, and I couldn't sleep. I just couldn't sleep, and I was up all night long. And he came in the morning, and he was like, "Are you still awake?" I'm like, "Yeah, you know what? I don't think I can stay. I think I have to go to New York City." And he's like, "But you just got here." I said, I know it's crazy, Randy, and I said, but I got to go. And I got on a bus. And in the winter of 1980, I came to New York City and did not know what I was going to do, or I did not know even how I was going to support myself. I had a friend who was very generous and said, "You can stay with me." And I did. And I got work as a stained glass artisan, because that is something that is part of my background. I used to be actually a professional stained glass artisan builder. In fact, I built windows. I built 2 of the windows in the National Cathedral, Royal.
Oh, wow.
Oddly enough. And I was working on a restoration for a window that was in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, still there. And I just was like, what is next? What do I do? And my focus got a whole lot more focused because I met my soon-to-be wife, and I thought I need to get a little bit more focused about what I'm doing. And one thing led to another, and I took some graduate courses at the new school and thought, I like telling stories. I like telling things that have an impact on people's lives. And I approached CNN. This was 1981, and
wow.
said, "Hey, I'm at the new school over here. Could I get an internship?" I did. And fortunately, it was in the business news unit, CNN Business News.
Mm-hmm.
And there were only I think there were four or five people in the unit at the time. There was Lou Dobbs, there was Myron Candell, there was a guy named Todd Benjamin, another reporter named Todd Cassidy, and a producer whose name totally escapes me. So they clearly needed work, and I went to work for them as a writer / producer, and I just fell in love with business and financial news, and the rest, as they say, became his history. It was great.
Wow. So you got a very early start there in the business division of CNN.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
Wow.
In fact, it grew, and at one point I was a vice president of CNN Business News, and I in that role and in that position, I actually had five bureaus in 3 continents, and I had over 200 people reporting to me on a regular basis. So you want to talk about the proverbial being in the right place at exactly the right time and having some really magical, fantastic things happen, just all come together. I am your story.
Yeah, I'm going to say that thought of, hey, I need to start getting more focused. I've got somebody I want to take care
Right.
of. You really got focused. I mean, that's quite a transition to doing some stained glass into I'm a business and finance producer for CNN. That's quite the transition.
You think maybe that's like an unlikely kind of thing to have happen?
You make it sound so easy.
Well,
struggling actor goes to New York.
I think Royal, there is a weird, strange connection, because when I was working for a stained glass studio in Texas, we were sent to take some windows out of a church to bring them back to do repair, and then obviously sent back to reinstall. Those windows belonged in a church, a very small church in a very small town, where William Jennings Bryan is rumored to have first delivered his Heart of Gold speech.
Sure.
So maybe the encounter with the windows shaped my future. I don't know.
Now I think we're trying to stretch this a little too far, but I like where you're going.
Yeah.
So how long were you at CNN then?
I was at CNN from the early 80s to 2011, 2012. So a few decades.
That's a whole market cycle or two.
That's a whole bunch of market cycles, as a matter of fact. Yeah, that's a whole bunch of market cycles. And not to age myself, but there was a certain Fed president who had been appointed by Jimmy Carter, who was at the reins, and interest rates back then make interest rates today look positively minute.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I had a sister who bought a car, and her interest rate on her car in 1980, 81 was 20, I think it was 22% of the loan on that. So yeah. Just a whole different world. So what are a couple of your favorite stories or periods of time going through that 30 years? Well, actually, one of them was right there in the beginning, because the George Foster Peabody Award that I won with the team in CNN Business News had to do with our coverage of the market crash in 1987.
Mm.
So it was interesting watching financial advisors talk about the markets leading up to it. And I remember really distinctly, there were a couple of people who gave me chills when they would come on, and they would, and these weren't crazy people. These were, they would come on and they'd be asked about about their sense of the markets. And they were very nervous, and they were very, and they were very, very cautious, which was radically different from everybody else who came on. And I thought, these people are either really, really, really wrong, or they're really, really bold. And as it turned out, they were really right. And interestingly enough, Royal, they were punished badly by people in the financial world at the time for having been correct and being nervous and being worried about what was going to happen. In fact, there were a lot of people who blamed them for the market crash, which of course is, looking back, patently absurd, because there's no way that they created the circumstances which led to that dreadful period of time, which is it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. And it was interesting seeing that happen, and then seeing the markets recycle themselves and come back up out of that, which is we now know in hindsight was the start of one of the best, longest, greatest bull markets in history.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Absolutely. And just for our younger listeners, do you want to just kind of describe, that was Black Monday, right?
Yeah.
What that was in the markets.
The markets opened and without hesitation plunged. And I don't remember the numbers now, because the indices the Dow was so much lower at the time. Mm-hmm. But they didn't fall 5%, 10%. They fell 15 and 20, and it just kept getting worse the longer the day went on. And it was nobody, especially the younger listeners to this podcast, have ever seen a day in a market that looked like that day. And it was truly terrifying. And I was really young. I had no investments in the market at the time. I was in many ways a complete bystander, staring at something that was utterly, completely out of control. And people just did not know what to do, because it was, I guess the best way to describe it, it was a tsunami that was coming at people, and people were paralyzed because they realized it's happening and there is absolutely nothing we can do about it. And they were trying desperately to tell people it was all going to be okay. And of course, who's going to believe it's all going to be okay at the moment when you were in the middle of one of the worst days in market history? It was amazing and terrifying at the same time.
I believe it's the Dow, where the S&P lost 25% of its value that day.
Yes.
And that sort of loss is something that honestly just can't happen anymore, because of all of the stop losses that the markets have put in there to make sure that doesn't happen.
Directly as a result of that day.
Yeah.
Directly as a result of that day, where they're like, we can never let that happen again.
We will just halt trading across the board.
We'll halt trading, let everybody catch their breath. We're going to put in a series of breaks here. When we hit these certain points, we're just, it was the thinking. It was like, just stop and let everybody collect themselves, maybe take a collective deep breath. And then after everybody's kind of calmed down, we'll open again and see what happens. And if it falls rapidly further, faster, boom,
we'll stop it again. Yeah. And as the markets go, it probably makes for a healthier market now to have some of those things in there to slow down that volatility. But still, that's an incredible day. Now, you were also there for, so the amazing time we had in the tech run up in the 90s, and then the complete collapse of that. So and I know we're kind of going over, a little bit of history here, but I just find it so fascinating because I was just getting into the industry in the 2001. But watching that changeover from the markets are going up, 30, 40% a year to a changeover there of we're going to have the biggest pullback here, in that sector that we've ever seen. So what was that euphoria like? Could you kind of in the inside see what was happening?
Well, it's interesting, Royal, because there was another thing that was happening at the same time as the rise of technology and technology stocks and our awareness of what technology could mean to us collectively. There was also the rise of individual stock trading. The individual investor had been more empowered and were able to trade on their own trades and do their own sort of day. I hate using the word day trading, but they could do their own investing directly through brokerages, which eliminated the need to go to Merrill Lynch and say and talk to the broker and have the broker. It just took that person, they took that middleman out. And so there was a feeling at the time, and I remember interviewing lots of people during that time period who felt like they literally could do no wrong.
Mm-hmm.
They could buy all of these stocks. They could buy Red Hat. They could buy Amazon. They could buy Cisco. They could buy anything. And it was going to work out because it was going to be just fine, because there was no way, I always love that phrase, no way things could ever go bad. And, and it's like, what is the phrase? How did you go bankrupt? Well, it went gradually and then suddenly.
Yep.
It was very much like that. It was very much a feeling of, oh no, I can be wrong. And I could be, in my portfolio, which was staggering in its size and really impressive to me to look at, suddenly wasn't anymore.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it literally disappeared, their wealth, and it's not because they sold anything even.
Right.
It's because their portfolio suddenly was devalued tremendously, and it was overdue. And for a person who had been looking at markets for a couple of decades at that point, and it was like not unexpected, but it was a sharp reminder that investing is a wonderful, great thing, but you need to approach it and look at it carefully. And if you will, to borrow from the title, you need to have some design. you need to remember what your purposes are. And you can't, if you want to take a flyer on a stock that has no earnings, that's trading at 400 times a multiple headed out on future earnings with no earnings in the present, well, that's your prerogative, and you can certainly do that. And I've done that, to be honest with you. I mean, but that was done with a knowledge, a calculated risk, and understanding of risk. And I think that probably, and you would know better than me because you're just coming into the market, it underscored you have to be aware of risk.
Yes.
At the same time, it's a reward.
And when you buy that company, you hope you're buying the Amazon and not the pets.com.
Oh yeah, no, but I remember telling a friend of mine, he had bought Amazon and he had like a couple of thousand shares of Amazon, because at one point Amazon was remarkably cheap.
Yes.
And it had gone up to like $100 or $200, and I'm like, you have to get out of this stock, man. You cannot sit there in this stock. And he's like, he's thinking, what do I care? It's like, I'm 28 years old. It's like, I'm fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I, to this day, don't think he has ever sold his Amazon stock.
So always be careful who you're getting advice from.
Royal, he's got a private island somewhere, but
Yeah.
the stories are few and far between.
So, it's a fascinating thing. I think the shifts we've seen in the financial journalism over the
Yes.
years. And I have my favorites of, where I want to get my information and that sort of thing. But as a producer and working, both in front of the camera but it sounds like mostly behind the scenes there, it's this amazing thing you have to do where when we talk about finances, we're really talking about the macro, 10, 20-year cycles of investing.
Right.
And you're doing everything on a very micro basis of rushing to the next earnings call, really like the market is. How did you balance that? And I would love to kind of hear your perspective as someone coming from that journalism background of how do you think investors should kind of balance that micro versus macro outlooks?
It's an interesting question. And when you have borne witness to it as a writer, as a producer, as a reporter, and as an anchor, and you've done so over an extended period of time, you get a natural instruction on that. There's always, for example, on earnings, you want the drive was always to be there on that earnings call and get that earnings out, get that earnings report out as fast, as quick and as possible, and then follow it up with caveats. The company A exceeded earnings, then the follow-up is, but their guidance for going forward is that you should be cautious. So that's an immediate, that is a boom right there at the moment kind of thing. But what you have to remember is that you can choose to live in those little tiny moments, or you can choose to, in terms of your investment philosophy, to remember those little tiny moments add up to a series of collective moments. And you want to be looking at all of those collective moments over time and realize that company A has done extraordinarily well over a 5 or 10-year period when you're looking at it. And you have to remember, you're saving, in this case, you are investing, for me anyway, for a future. You're not investing for the moment. I was never a day trader. And in fairness, I couldn't be, because I was a reporter and I was reporting on all these stocks.
Right.
So my 401k at the time was invested, and I did not actively trade because I just felt like, it would create some conflicts of interest and some ethical dilemmas,
Absolutely,
if you will. And so, but you do learn that it's like you can adopt an investing philosophy, which is of the moment, which is a day trader kind of thing. Or you can decide the history of the market shows us that stocks and equities are really a sound bet. There's always going to be volatility. There's always going to be periods of time when they go down, but they're a good, solid investment over time. And you just, and perhaps that's something that can only be gained by a number of years doing it, and watching it and reporting on it and doing what you do, which is counseling people about how to deal with their finances and what to do in terms of their investments. But that's kind of like the best answer that I can give, because it was earned through experience.
Right. I think that is just such wise advice for folks who get caught up in the moment of this report, that report. I saw something in the paper, and just chasing whatever that next thing is.
I just think, Royal, I know you have encountered this countless times. There are people who believe that they can time the market. They believe that it's like they can buy a stock or they can buy the market, and they can always get out ahead of a drop, always get out ahead of whatever might happen. And I, in all of my years of doing this, have never seen anybody who could do that. I've seen lots of people who think that they could do that, but you know, it is an impossible thing to do, and you may get lucky. You might get lucky from time to time, but largely, and speaking over a lifetime, no.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. So I got my cert in 2001 as a commodity broker.
Oh, okay.
And one of the things, and we were just working with retail clients, you know, teaching people how to trade commodities, that sort of thing. And one of the most interesting, you know, things that we would always kind of throw around the office was be really careful of the clients who win on their first trade. Be really careful of the clients who, you know, really kind of maybe have a really good trade that first trade because they think it's going to be easy. It's not. You know, maybe a modest gain, you know, 5-10%, that's okay. But, you know, if you knock it out of the park that first trade, you're probably ruined because that's what you're going to expect.
Oh, yes. I actually have, I've known a lot of commodity traders. And I used to know commodity traders back when, remember when there was a floor of traders trading commodities? Remember that once upon a time? And I had a brother-in-law who was a very successful in the commodity markets. But you know, I one time asked a commodity trader, how do you deal with this? I mean, this is because it's notoriously volatile. And he said, you know, some days you go home. Some days, he said, some days I've gone home down $50,000-$60,000. And he said, you know, and I gotta get back up and come back in, and knowing that I might today make $80,000. I might make $20,000. But he said, that's the nature of this beast. And I thought, man, that's a pretty brutal beast.
Yeah, that's a different kind of risk tolerance there.
Yes. That's a whole different kind of risk tolerance, man.
Yeah. So kind of looking right now, the interesting thing with you know, kind of 40 years in the financial industry, we talk about the Federal Reserve. From somebody who's been following this for 40 years intimately, how important is the Federal Reserve to moving the markets?
I think that it's a complicated issue, and I'm going to try not to be boring about it, but it's a central and key issue. When Paul Volcker took over the Federal Reserve back in the late 70s, early 80s, he understood that money supply had to be constrained, that the amount of money available in the markets had to be constrained because we had a period of intense inflation. Inflation was out of control, and he needed to, in essence, break the markets and break the cycle. And in order to do that, he focused on severely limiting the amount of money in the markets. We have never seen anything like it since, which is why at the time we saw interest rates in the double digits. It was not unusual. The inverse of that has been probably within the last 20 years, where we've seen a Federal Reserve determined to support the markets, determined to do their best to support equities and the markets, and they have allowed an enormous amount of money into the markets. And they've done that. The investors know them as QE1 and QE2. Coming in, and they were buying massive amounts of securities, bonds off the market, and pumping the market full of dollars, which is where people got the phrase, the Fed is printing the money, because they literally were dumping money out of reserves into the markets in order to support the markets. We can argue about whether that was a good thing to do or a bad thing to do, but I want to point out the two extremes, because I want to point out anybody who argues that the Fed is immaterial to the market is wrong.
Yeah,
the Fed is absolutely a monster living in the markets to be reckoned with. Yeah, we can get into talking about economic policy. We can get into talking about budgetary policy, and those are legitimate, serious discussions that need to be had in a very non-political way. But, if you want to know the impact of the Fed, look at the Fed in the early 80s and look just at the Fed within the last 20 years, and you will see a candid, stark difference. And you can maybe understand better the role of the Fed and its impact on the markets.
Excellent, excellent. So as we kind of reach the end of our time together for this week, what's kind of brought you back into audio podcasting and that sort of thing?
I am really fortunate in that I was very successful and had a very good television career and a very good television journalism career. There have been lots and lots of changes, and it's not the same world today as when I began in it. And I'm not trying to go into some kind of political diatribe, but the standards and things are very different now, and the editorial budgets, meaning what they cover, is really different now. And so I enjoyed a really, really great run and a good time. And over the years, especially toward the end of my career in television, I began doing some radio work again. Some of it was really decidedly not financial, because I did some radio work with the Diocese of Brooklyn, and did a radio show with Monsignor Harrington, which I enjoyed. Kieran Harrington, a little slightly Irish kind of guy, and I also was doing some work for the Wall Street Journal radio group while it still existed. So that cycle just kind of worked, where it gave me a natural bridge from television back into radio and audio, which I like. I really find this to be a more intimate, personal medium, and it gives you a different relationship. And I know you know this from doing your years of podcasting. It gives you a different kind of relationship with the people who listen to the program. And I just think that's magical. It does not exist in television.
Wonderful. So you got into journalism because you met a girl. How's that girl doing?
She's doing great. She's doing great. She might say I've been a problem. Okay, I just want to add that caveat. But we've got two kids who are grown, who are really, they're two adults that I'm extraordinarily proud of. My daughter has two kids. Her husband is I joke, I call him a serial entrepreneur. He has a number of different companies always in the works that are doing phenomenally well. And my son is an attorney and married down in Richmond, Virginia, and they just had their first. So we have two great kids, and we now have three grandkids. And man, I cannot speak to the marvel and the incredible nature of that kind of thing in my life.
Wonderful. Well, we are so excited to have you join the podcast. We are so excited just to get your expertise and wisdom here on the Life by Design podcast. And if our listeners have questions for Bill, or want to ask us a question about some of these things that we touched on today, please feel free to email us at royal@opfa.com. And for our listeners, if you have any financial questions that maybe this piqued your interest in something, visit our website at opfa.com. You can schedule an appointment right there and be happy to chat with you. So with that, Bill, I'll turn it over to you to take us out of here. And I just want to thank you for your time today.
No, you're more than welcome. I'm excited to be with you, Royal. Your podcasts are fascinating and interesting. If anybody, while they're on their website, wants to go listen to the podcast, it is on opfa.com. But for now, let's thank all of you for listening to the podcast. If you're a new listener and you like what you heard, be sure to hit that subscribe button so that the next episode will be automatically delivered to your listening device and you don't have to worry about having missed one. We'd also love it that if you would share and you would rate this podcast and get the word out about it. Thank you for listening. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to the Life by Design podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available.